Hey, my name is Owen Calloway, and I need to tell you something before I start. The woman who changed everything. She saw me long before I ever said a word to her. She watched me watch her. She waited. And then one morning she asked me a question I wasn't ready for. I noticed you watching. How long were you planning to keep that up? I'm going to tell you what happened after that. But first, let me start from the beginning. If this kind of story is your thing. The quiet kind, the slow burn kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself, go ahead and subscribe. New story every week. This one's worth staying for. My name is Owen Calloway. I'm 27 years old. I live alone in a 2-bedroom house on the east side of Asheville, North Carolina. The mountains are right there when you look east in the morning. Close enough that on clear days you can see where the tree line breaks. I never get tired of that. The second bedroom in my house is an office. I have a standing desk I never stand at, 2 monitors, and a coffee maker that runs on a timer so it's ready before I wake up. I've never had a guest sleep in that room. The closet still has the previous owner's shelf paper in it. Work remotely as a software developer for a mid-sized SaaS company based out of Denver. I've never been to the Denver office. I've met most of my colleagues as small rectangles on a screen. The work is good, technically interesting, well compensated, and almost entirely invisible to the world. I write code that runs in the background of platforms that other people use without knowing I exist. Which honestly suited me fine. My days have a shape to them. Coffee at 6:50. Laptop open by 7:15. Video calls in the morning where I'm always the one who types the meeting notes because I never know what to do with my hands. Deep work in the afternoon when the rest of the team is in meetings. A run around the block before dinner. Simple food. Baseball on TV when the season's right. A book until my eyes give out. I don't go out much. I've got a couple of guys I'll catch a game with. Grab a beer, but nothing close. I've never been particularly good at close. That's not self-pity. It's just accurate. My dad left when I was 12. Not with a scene. Not with a fight. He just reduced himself over time. First it was fewer weekends. Then fewer calls. Then I'd realized 3 months had passed and I hadn't heard from him, and I wasn't surprised. He was still alive. We still talked twice a year, civil and brief. But he'd taught me something early, the way parents sometimes teach you things they never mean to. He taught me that people who stay are the exception. That you don't build too much around someone who might not be there tomorrow. So I kept things light. Kept myself at a comfortable distance from anything that could require me to stay. I told myself it was just my personality. I believed it mostly. Then Maya Serrano moved in next door. And everything I thought I knew about myself turned out to be conditional. She moved in on a Saturday in early March. I noticed the way you notice anything when you work from home with a window facing the street. Between tasks without meaning to. A moving truck. A few pieces of furniture that looked well used and chosen carefully. Boxes marked with black marker. Kitchen, books, fragile, handle with some care. That last one made me look twice, and then her. Standing on the driveway directing the movers with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this before and doesn't need to make it dramatic. Dark hair pulled back. A focused expression that didn't invite interruption. We made eye contact once. She gave a short, clean nod. The universal signal for, we can be neighbors without being friends. I respected that immediately. I learned her name 3 days later. A package arrived for her at my door by mistake. I knocked. She came to the door in a clinic jacket, clearly just home from work. I handed over the box, said my name, she said hers. Maya Serrano. She thanked me, said she was still getting settled. And the door closed. That was our longest conversation for the next 3 weeks. Then I noticed her routine. Every evening. Around 5:30, she'd come out to the small porch that connected her backyard to mine along a low wooden fence. She'd set down a thick foam mat, dark green, worn at the corners, and move through a series of stretches and exercises that looked half yoga, half something more clinical, controlled, deliberate, like she was working through something specific. Not working out for anyone's benefit. There was no phone propped up to record it. No music most days. Just her and the movements. And the late afternoon light coming over the ridge and turning everything a particular shade of gold that you only get in the mountains at that hour. She wasn't performing. That was the thing. She was just present. In her body. In the moment. In a way that I realized I almost never was. The first time I noticed, I was at my desk. My back window faces the shared fence line directly. I'd stood up to stretch, looked out, saw her starting her warm-up. I watched for maybe 15 seconds. Turned back to the screen. The second time, it was a little longer. I told myself I was just resting my eyes. By the second week, I was timing my afternoon coffee break differently. I want to be honest about what that was and what it wasn't. I wasn't hiding. I was standing in my own kitchen in plain sight, watching a neighbor through a window. It was a small thing, but I knew, in the part of yourself that always knows, that I was making choices about where to be and when. That I was letting it become a habit. That the word harmless was doing a lot of work in my internal monologue, and still I kept doing it. I started noticing details. The way she always began with her neck and shoulders, slow circles, like she was releasing something from the day before she could work. The way she'd pause mid-set if something felt wrong, not quit, just pause, recalibrate, go again. The way she tied her hair higher when it was warm and lower when there was wind. The way she sometimes checked her phone and her whole posture would shift for a moment, some invisible weight landing on her. Before she'd set the phone face down on the railing and go back to her routine. That image stuck with me. The phone face down. The choice to keep going anyway. I told myself a lot of things about why I kept watching. That it was just a pleasant break in a monotonous afternoon. That there was something meditative about watching someone so focused. That I wasn't doing anything wrong. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. It had been going on for almost a month when it happened. A Tuesday. I'd had a grinding morning. A deployment failure that took 4 hours to debug and turned out to be a single misnamed variable. The particular frustration of that kind of thing, where the problem was so small and so stupid, had left me in a mood I couldn't shake. I quit early. Made coffee. Stood at the window. She came out at her usual time. I watched. And then, without warning, she stopped. Completely still, in the middle of a movement she'd done 100 times. And she turned her head and looked directly at the window. Not in the direction of the window. At the window. At me. I didn't move. My brain sent the signal and nothing in my body responded. I just stood there with my mug in my hand like an exhibit. She held the look for a long moment. Not angry. Not flustered. Just looking with that steady calm she seemed to carry everywhere. Then she turned back, finished her set, rolled up the mat, and went inside. I put my mug down, sat at my desk, stared at the screen without seeing anything. That night was long. I ran through it 50 times. Maybe she hadn't actually seen me. Maybe she was looking at a bird. Maybe the angle of the light had the window looking dark from her side. By morning I had almost convinced myself of the bird theory. Then I went to check the mail. She was on her front porch when I stepped outside, sitting in the small chair by the door. Coffee mug in both hands, watching me with the specific patience of someone who had been waiting. "I've seen you at the window," she said. Her voice was even conversational, like she was noting that it might rain, and something about the calm of it, the complete absence of drama, made it so much worse than if she'd been upset. I opened my mouth. What came out was somewhere between an apology and an explanation and a confession, and none of them were finished. I said I knew. I said I was sorry. I said I hadn't meant for it to be, and then I ran out of sentence. She watched me go through it without expression. Waited until I was done. Then she said it. "I noticed you watching. How long were you planning to keep that up?" I thought about it seriously, which was probably the wrong thing to do. "Honestly?" I said. I hadn't gotten that far. She looked at me for a moment. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in weeks," she said. "It's also not reassuring at all. I know." "Come inside," she said. "I'll make breakfast." I followed her. Because what else do you do when the woman you've been watching through a window for a month invites you to breakfast with the tone of someone settling an account? Her kitchen was clean and simple. A few plants on the windowsill. A corkboard on the wall with papers pinned to it, schedules, notes, what looked like patient charts with the names blacked out. She moved around the space efficiently, pulling out eggs, Finding the pan without looking for it. She poured me coffee without asking how I took it. Black, which happened to be right. She asked what I did. I explained. Software, remote, the company in Denver I'd never visited. She nodded and said she'd wondered, because she'd never seen me leave. I asked about the clinic jacket I'd seen her in the day she moved in. Physical therapy, she said. Rehabilitation. Patients recovering from injuries, surgeries, accidents that had changed how they moved through the world. She'd been at the Asheville clinic for 4 months. Before that, Charlotte. She made eggs the way she did everything else, focused, no wasted motion. I sat at the counter and tried to be a normal human being, which was harder than it sounds under the circumstances. She mentioned her father once, briefly, while the eggs were cooking. His name was Arturo. He lived about 20 minutes away. She'd moved to Asheville partly for the clinic, partly to be closer to him. He had a degenerative joint condition, not something that would get better. Something that required increasing management as time went on. She said it the way people say things they've had to say many times. Matter of fact, streamlined. I noticed the way her shoulders adjusted when she said it. The small shift of someone carrying weight they've learned to distribute so well it barely shows. I didn't say I'm sorry. It felt like the wrong response for a reason I couldn't fully articulate. I said, "That sounds like a lot to carry alone." She turned from the stove and looked at me. Something moved through her expression, quick and contained. "It is," she said. And then she handed me a plate and changed the subject. One word, just one, leave it in the comments. What do you call the feeling when you show up somewhere and you're not entirely sure why, but something in you keeps saying stay? I read everyone. After that morning, things shifted in the way they do when two people have crossed some small line neither of them named out loud. We talk over the fence in the evenings. Not long conversations. Just the kind of exchange that accumulates over time. How the day went. Something that frustrated us. Something that didn't. She had a dry humor she deployed without warning or preamble. A deadpan observation in the middle of an ordinary sentence that caught you off guard every time. I started listening for it the way you listen for a particular bird. You've learned to recognize. One evening she brought over a container of soup. Said she'd made too much. I accepted it and spent 2 days trying to think of an equivalent reason to knock on her door. I landed on a 6-pack of a local IPA I'd seen in her recycling. Too much, I said. She looked at the beer, then at me. You don't seem like someone who over-purchases things, she said. I'm working on it. I said. She stepped back and let me in. There was a rhythm forming that I didn't want to examine too closely. Because examining things has a way of making them fragile. So I just showed up when it felt right and tried not to overthink the rest. I should tell you about my houseplants. I have 4 of them. Had 4 of them. She noticed them through the kitchen window one afternoon and used the word institutional. Specifically, she said they were experiencing a slow institutional neglect. She was not wrong. 2 of them had started doing something that plants do when they've given up. A kind of leaning away from the window that is less about the light and more about the will to live. She supervised the repotting on a Saturday morning like a physical therapist observing someone learn to walk again. Which, if you think about it, is exactly what it was. I followed instructions carefully. I used the right soil. I watered them correctly. One of them survived. You're better with code than plants, she said. The plants don't give useful error messages, I said. She considered this with full seriousness. That's actually fair, she said. It was a few weeks later that she talked about Arturo more fully. We were on her back porch after dinner. The sun already gone behind the ridge, the air turning cool. She'd had a hard day at the clinic, a patient who'd plateaued, a conversation about expectations that hadn't gone well, and she was quieter than usual. She mentioned her father almost sideways. The way you mention something you've been not mentioning for a while, he'd started missing appointments. The drive had become difficult. His hands, she said, which carried its own particular sadness for a man who had built and repaired things with his hands his whole life. He was resisting help the way people who have always been capable resist it. Not out of pride exactly. More out of an inability to reconcile who he'd been with who he was becoming. He doesn't want to need help, she said. And I don't know how to show him that accepting it isn't giving up. I sat with that for a moment. He probably knows, I said. He just hasn't gotten there yet. She looked at the yard. Yeah, she said. I'm just not sure how much time we have for getting there. I didn't have anything useful to say to that. So I didn't say anything. I just stayed on the porch until the cold made it impractical. That night I couldn't focus on anything. I opened a browser and started looking up resources. I'm a researcher by habit. When I have a problem I can't solve directly, I pull information until I can see the shape of it. I found more than I expected. State assistance programs for adults with mobility conditions. Nonprofits that subsidized home modifications. Grant programs specifically for adaptive equipment. Things she might not know about because she'd been too busy managing the crisis to go looking for the infrastructure around it. I didn't send it to her. Not yet, it felt too forward. Like I was assuming a role I hadn't been given. I saved it. Kept it. Waited. In the meantime, things between us took on a rhythm that was easy and occasional. Not structured. Not named. Just present. I should mention what our evenings looked like by then, because it had changed from the beginning. The fence was still there between our yards, but we'd both started pulling our chairs closer to it. Sometimes I'd be out there with a beer and she'd come through her back door without planning to, and just end up at the fence talking. Other times she'd text something short, 2 words at most, and I'd know it meant come outside. One evening we ended up out there for almost 2 hours. Not talking about anything significant. The mountains. A bad review she'd read about a restaurant we'd both been curious about. The specific misery of video calls. The conversation moved without direction. The way conversations do when you're not trying to get anywhere. Around 9 she said she should go inside. She didn't move for another 20 minutes. I noticed that. I didn't say anything about it. But I noticed that the call came on a Wednesday night, 8:47. I just closed my laptop and was debating whether the game was worth turning on. My phone lit up with her name. Her voice was different. The same control that was always there, but pulled tighter. Pressed against something. My dad fell, she said. I'm heading to the hospital now. She wasn't asking me to come. I don't think she knew what she was doing, except that she needed to tell someone. And I was the person she called. Which hospital? I said. Owen, you don't have to. Which one, Maya? She told me. I grabbed my keys before she finished the address. The waiting room at the, had that particular quality that all hospital waiting rooms have at night. The specific sound of machines and distant voices. The fluorescent light that flattens everyone. The chairs designed to be sat in for short periods that everyone ends up sitting in for hours. She was there when I arrived. Sitting straight-backed, hands clasped in her lap. Eyes on the double doors like she could make them open by focus alone. She looked up when I walked toward her. You came, she said. And something in how she said it, the slight uptick of surprise, told me she hadn't entirely expected it. I said I would, I said. Which was simple but true. I sat beside her and asked what they knew. She told me clearly and in the right order. The fall, the kitchen floor, the neighbor who'd heard the sound and checked on him, the scans. She spoke with clinical precision because she was a clinician and because it was easier. Then the other kind of speaking. We waited. An hour, then another. The room cycled through other people's crises around us. She asked questions when the nurse came out with updates. Wrote things on her phone. Stayed controlled. But I watched her. And I could see underneath all that composure. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been bracing for something bad for a long time. And who is now living in the moment they'd been bracing for. And who is discovering that preparation doesn't really prepare you. Around midnight. The doctor came out. Arturo had a fracture in his wrist from catching himself. Some bruising along his ribs. No head injury. No surgery required. They'd keep him overnight for monitoring, but the outlook was good. Maya exhaled. It was a long, slow, complete release, like something physical leaving her body. Her eyes went bright for just a second before she pulled them back. We went to sit in the hallway outside his room. He was sedated. She wasn't ready to leave. I wasn't going to suggest it. We talked for a while. The kind of talking that happens late at night in quiet places, where the usual filters are down because you're too tired to maintain them. She told me about Arturo. Who he'd been. A man who'd repaired his own car until he was 62, who'd laid the tile in his own kitchen, who'd built the bookshelf in her childhood bedroom that she'd taken with her to every apartment she'd ever lived in. A man who had asked for very little and given a great deal and who was now being asked to receive, which was the harder direction for that kind of person. She told me about Charlotte. About the relationship she'd left behind there, not because of a single moment, but because the cumulative weight of managing her father's situation from 3 hours away had taken the energy she would have needed to maintain it. She'd stopped having enough left over. The relationship had noticed before she did. I got used to doing it alone, she said. Her voice was quiet. Not sad exactly. More like reporting. And then that just became the arrangement. I thought about my father again. About the arrangement I'd made with myself at 12 years old. The one where people leave and the smart move is to leave first, or at least not need them enough that it matters when they go. I'd spent 15 years honoring that arrangement. I'd gotten pretty good at it. I didn't say any of this. But I thought about it. Around 1 a.m, she fell asleep against the wall. It happened gradually, her voice slowing, her answers getting softer, her eyes closing between sentences. I draped my jacket over her shoulders. She didn't wake up. I stayed. I checked my phone once. A work email about a meeting the next morning. I put it face down on the seat beside me. I thought about her phone on the fence railing, face down, about choosing to keep going. I understood the gesture differently now. She stirred around 6, blinked, registered the jacket. Registered me. You stayed, she said. Not a question. Something she was working out. Yeah, she was quiet for a moment in that particular way she had. Turning something over. I don't really know how to let people do that, she said. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at her hands. I don't know how to not immediately make myself okay so they don't have to stay. I thought about that. You don't have to be okay right now, I said. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at me then, and whatever she saw in my face was apparently the right thing, because she nodded slowly and leaned her head back against the wall and let the morning be what it was. After Arturo came home, wrist in a splint and strict instructions he was going to resist, I pulled out everything I'd saved those weeks earlier. I organized it the way I'd organize a technical document. Programs for home modification assistance in North Carolina. Financial aid for adaptive equipment. A nonprofit that coordinated home care navigation. A state grant specifically for aging adults with mobility-related conditions. I wrote plain language summaries of each one. No jargon. Just what it covers, who qualifies, how to apply, approximate timeline. I sent it to her on a Thursday evening with a single line of text. Compiled this a while back. Might be useful, she called instead of texting back. Owen. Yeah, when did you put this together? A few weeks ago. A pause. Why didn't you send it then? I thought about how to answer that. It didn't feel like my place yet, I said. And then it did. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she had that was thoughtful, not uncomfortable. Thank you, she said. And she said it the way you say something. When you mean more than the word itself contains. 2. Weekends later, we sat at our kitchen table with a stack of printed forms and her laptop and worked through the applications together. She's the kind of person who needs to see paper. I translated bureaucratic language while she cross-referenced documents. At one point, we discovered 2 different programs required the same form in 2 different formats, submitted to 2 different offices, with no explanation offered anywhere. She put her pen down and looked at the ceiling. This was designed by people who have never had to fill it out, she said. Multiple people, I said. Across several departments. Revised 6 times between 2008 and 2019, she looked at me. Is that supposed to make this better? No, I said. Just historically accurate. She picked her pen back up. You're helpful in very specific ways, she said. I'm aware, I said. She almost smiled. That was good enough. 3 weeks after we submitted the first application, it came through. A grant covering a substantial portion of the home modification costs. Grab bars in the bathroom. A stair railing with a better grip. Non-slip flooring in the kitchen. And eligibility confirmed for a secondary program that would offset some of the adaptive equipment she'd been paying for out of pocket for 2 years. I was at my desk when the text came. 2 words. It worked. I knocked on her door 10 minutes later. She opened it looking like someone who had just set down something very heavy. The particular relief of it, the way it changes a person's posture, their face, the air around them. She didn't say anything. She stepped forward and put her arms around me. Not tentatively, fully. Her head against my shoulder, both arms around my back. I held her and we stood like that in the doorway for a while. When she stepped back, her eyes were dry but her expression was open in a way it rarely was. "I've been managing this for 2 years," she said. "Alone, and then you just showed up. And kept showing up. And never made it about what you were doing." "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have found eventually," I said. "Maybe," she said. "But you were there while I was finding it. That's the part that mattered." After that, our lives took on a shape I didn't have a name for but recognized immediately as something I'd been avoiding. Shared dinners. Weekend visits to Arturo, who, now that the modifications were in and the financial weight had eased, turned out to be exactly as sharp and dry and quietly funny as Maya had described. He tried to teach me about woodworking on my second visit. I have no understanding of woodworking. I wrote down everything he said with complete sincerity. He appreciated that. On the third visit, he gave me a small piece of oak he'd shaped into a rough wedge and told me it was practice stock. I kept it on my desk. Maya started doing her evening routine again. The mat came back out around 5:30. She'd stopped during the worst of it, the way you stop the maintenance things when the crisis things are taking everything. But now the green mat was back on the back porch, and she moved through the routine in the fading light the same way she always had, except now I was outside too. Not pretending. Not through a window. Just there on my back step with coffee, watching openly. One evening she caught me mid-stretch. "Still watching," she said without looking up. "Still watching," I confirmed. She shook her head. But she was smiling. It became our inside reference, a nod to how it all started. Turning what could have been something uncomfortable into something that belonged to us. The night that closed the loop on all of it was in late October. We'd had dinner at Arturo's. Pasta he'd made himself. It had taken most of the afternoon and he was visibly proud of every component, which was wonderful to watch. The three of us sat at his kitchen table and he told a story about a road trip he and Maya's mother had taken in 1987 that involved a blown tire, a wrong turn, and a diner in rural Tennessee that had, apparently, the best pie either of them had ever eaten. Maya had heard the story before. She listened to it like it was new. We drove home in the dark, the mountains just shapes against the sky. She walked me to the gate between our yards instead of the front door, the one I'd started using regularly by then. We stood there in the October air, her porch light on behind her, the yard quiet and dark. She turned to face me. "I want to tell you something," she said. I waited. "I knew you were watching for a long time before I said anything." She looked at me steadily. "From the beginning, basically." "I figured," I said. "What you don't know," she said, "is why I waited." She paused. "Not for effect. Just gathering it. I've had people notice me before, Owen. That's not the rare thing." She took a small step forward. "The rare thing is staying. Being there when it's inconvenient. Not making it into a story about yourself. Just staying." The wind came off the ridge, moving through the aspens at the edge of the yard. "So I waited," she said. "I noticed you at the window and I waited. I wanted to see what you would do. And then you showed up at the hospital that night without being asked. And then you showed up with the research. And then the kitchen table with the forms. And every time I thought, okay, this is probably the last time. This is where he decides it's too much. You just kept showing up." She was quiet for a moment. The neighborhood was still around us. A porch light on down the street. The last of the leaves moving in the cold. "I noticed you," she said softly. "I just needed to see if you'd stay." I thought about my father. About the way he'd taught me to keep one foot pointed toward the exit. About how I'd spent 15 years treating every relationship like a temporary arrangement. Because temporary arrangements don't leave you standing in a driveway wondering where everything went. I thought about that window. About a month of afternoon coffee breaks I'd told myself were harmless. About how the real thing I'd been looking for through that window wasn't her routine. It was someone who had one. Someone who showed up for herself. Someone who faced things instead of reducing themselves and eventually disappearing. I thought about the hospital hallway at 2 in the morning and how I'd picked up my phone, seen the work email, and put it face down, the same gesture. I know what it cost you to ask for help, I said. With your dad. With any of it. I know that's not natural for you, she nodded once. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I want you to know that. Not as a promise, just as a fact. She looked at me for a long moment. Something settled in her face. The last thing going down. She leaned in and kissed me. Slow and certain. The way the whole thing between us had been. No rush, no announcement. Her hand against my jaw, the cold air around us, the sound of the yard at night. When we pulled back, her forehead rested against mine for a moment. Her eyes closed. Good, she said softly. Because I'm tired of doing this alone. I drove the 20 feet home and sat in the dark kitchen for a while. Not out of sadness. Just to let it settle. To let it be real before I moved on to the next thing. I thought about how strange it is, the way the important things start. Not with a declaration or a defining moment. With small repeated things. A window in the afternoon. A coffee that gets cold. A mat rolled out on a back porch in fading light. A woman who noticed you watching and waited to see what you would do with the noticing. I'd spent most of my adult life convinced that staying was something other people did. Something my father had demonstrated was optional. Something I'd quietly decided wasn't for me. But I'd stayed at that hospital. I'd stayed at that kitchen table. I'd stayed at the window and then at the fence and at everything that followed. Not because I was trying to be someone. Not because I decided to be different. Because for the first time in longer than I could account for, leaving hadn't made sense. She'd noticed me watching. She'd waited to see. If I'd stay, I guess I finally had an answer,